Battles of Legend Terminal Revenge releases on June 21st, with major support waves for 4 different dual terminal archetypes and a couple absolutely massive new cards for existing and upcoming meta decks. This set is closer in scope to a main set than most side products usually reach, meaning this will be the 3rd consecutive, extremely important everything you need to know, with the 4th not even a month away. Some might think my life seems like a living hell in which every 5 minutes Konami revolutionizes the game on an unfathomable scale, but for me, I just remind myself of the ancient proverb. You're never really done with laundry unless you do it naked. Here's everything you need to know. Mirror Mage of the Ice Barrier is a level 2 Aqua Tuner that contributes another monster to summon up to 3 tokens, and increase its level by the number of tokens you summoned, but locks you to water synchros, and when it's sent to the graveyard can grab an Ice Barrier from deck or banished. Georges can summon itself if you control an Ice Barrier, summons an Ice Barrier from hand or graveyard on summon, and while you control another Ice Barrier, your opponent can't activate monster effects in the graveyard. Frozen Domain of the Ice Barrier makes your Ice Barrier monster effects unrespondable, can bounce an Ice Barrier when a monster is summoned from the extra deck to bottom a card from the field or graveyard, and during the end phase, this is great, you have to prove to your opponent that you're actually playing Ice Barriers or it fucking dies. Finally, Lancia, Ancestral Dragon of the Ice Mountain, is a level 10 synchro that requires a water tuner that up to twice per turn summons an Ice Barrier from pretty much anywhere when your opponent special summons, then can change an opponent's monster to defense, and when your opponent removes it, you can summon an Ice Barrier from extra deck as a synchro summon. These cards work with pretty much just the Ice Barrier support from Freezing Chain structure deck, because the earlier ones are basically unsalvageable to make an actually playable strategy out of. Lancia has a unique end boss that gives the deck the ability to bring out its various floodgates as your opponent tries to play, disrupting them with things like Georges for an Abyss Dweller, Medium for a Shien, Warlock for anti-spell, and Raiho to make your opponent minus every time they want to use a monster effect. Being able to use Lancia twice in a turn will inherently fulfill the requirement many of them have that you control another name, but Georges also has the ability to turn itself on by reborning a level 5 or lower on summon, meaning you can cut your opponent off grave effects as early as their first special summon. Meanwhile, Mirror Mage is an absolutely crazy combo piece, being able to search when it's sent to the graveyard for any reason, like being linked off for Almirage, pitched with Swap Frog, Agarine, or Revealer, or milled with Swap Frog or Hexa Spirit. As a level 2 Aqua, it can be part of a totally awesome summon, and will trigger to search again when detached during your opponent's standby phase. And its effect to summon tokens is incredibly powerful, putting 8 stars of material on board at the cost of any random guy on board, so you can make drag out while going through Coral Dragon for a draw. Also, if at any point in your combo you can go through Speaker, you can banish that to summon a 4th token, so you can make Croco Dragon and draw 4 cards, with the ability to chain block 3 of them with the 4th due to Coral Dragon. This has given the deck the ability to operate mostly as a mid-range style strategy that tries to accrue massive amounts of advantage through Lancia and Croco Dragon, while ending on a modest board with a rotating cast of interruptions and a lot of tricky float effects, most importantly Lancia's ability to tag into Trish if he's ever killed. And there's a few decent one-card combos to make these sorts of boards, owing mostly to Revealer's ability to summon Mirror from deck. Spiritual Beast Tamer Lara is a level 1 Psychic that can pitch itself to normal summon a Ritual Beast, special summons a Ritual Beast from deck when it's banished, and can banish itself from field or graveyard to protect a Ritual Beast from being destroyed. Ritual Beast Inheritance docks your opponent's monster by 200 for each type of Ritual Beast you control, can reveal a Ritual Beast in hand to search one with a different type, then discard a card, and if more than one monster is special summoned at the same time, can change the battle position of a monster on the field. Ritual Beast Ulti Nochio Drago is a fusion of a beast and a tamer that can be summoned by banishing materials from field or graveyard, protects all your other Ritual Beasts from being targeted, and can quick effect tag into just one Ritual Beast. And Ritual Beast Ulti Rei-Rotari is a Link 4 that makes both players unable to tribute as a cost to activate card effects, can add back a banished Ritual Beast, then immediately normal summon a Ritual Beast, and during the opponent's turn can banish a Ritual Beast card you control and a card your opponent controls. Now, I personally believe that they're cowards for not also giving it the effect to tag out into 4 Ritual Beasts, but that's just me. Regardless, this support is huge for Ritual Beast consistency and the ceiling of their plays. Lara is already crazy for being both a spiritual and a tamer, something that made Winda playable even though she does absolutely nothing. In contrast, Lara does everything, being able to summon a tamer from deck when she's banished by Kanahawk makes Kanahawk on its own full combo, and being able to be part of the summon of Nochio Drago after being milled by Rampengu makes that a 1 card also, although not as strong. You can even play Gold Sark to get a body on board if you really wanted the extender, although every monster's summon restriction makes special summoning any of them an investment unto itself. That's where its effect in hand comes into play, bringing the total number of possible normal summons for the deck up to 5 alongside Rei-Rotari. Her protection effect is great, especially since it'll trigger her effect to summon, giving you a decent way to get that extra advantage on your opponent's turn, and since she can be summoned with E-Tele, you can chain to an effect that would destroy destroy one of your monsters to have it replace it on resolution. Inheritance is a good consistency piece that also can serve as a pretty good sacrifice to Raritari, so you can banish an opponent's card without losing something all that valuable. The battle position changing effect can be used when you tag out an ulti on your opponent's turn to maybe keep you from being threatened by the battle phase, but also lets you put one of your names your ulti tagged out into attack position so it can contribute to your OTK line. Nochio Drago breaks all the rules of Ritual Beast by letting you use material from Graveyard, making it super easy to summon while also giving you a way to banish the materials you use to make ulti Kenemon so that it can tag back into them if you need. Also, being the first ulti you can summon without giving up any names on field means it's the best way to make ulti Gaia Pelea without breaking the bank. It also fixes scenarios where you make ulti Kanahawk with no way to get a third name banished. Normally you'd be forced to put both its materials back in the grave to get the search and be left with nothing for it to tag into. But with Nochio Drago, you can just put those names back in the banished and tag out. Speaking of tagging out, Nochio Drago is the first ulti that only tags into one name, but because it doesn't specify spiritual and or tamer like all the other ones do, it can tag out into an ulti who can then tag into two names anyway, so you can end on him to keep the targeting protection into the start of your opponent's turn, then dance through a banished Kenemon to get back two names for follow-up and extra pops with steeds. And of course, while most of this is still in service of looping ulti Kanahawk as many times as possible, the ultimate goal now is ulti Raritari, the shiny new boss monster that extends your plays, floodgates, and interrupts. The floodgate is interesting, I guess. It means you can have some random unlosable matchups like Drytron and Magispector. The intended purpose is to floodgate Infernoid because I guess those two groups have beef or something. Samsara D Lotus becomes a worse card every time I breathe, I swear to God. And the reciprocal banish is cool since it can target an ulti that can tag out so only your opponent is losing anything on the interaction. It's also maybe worth mentioning that Raritari is a generic Link 4, so if there's ever a best deck that just hard loses to the Tribute Floodgate, most decks will have it as an option and can even use the banish if they have to by targeting itself. More importantly, this means you can end on an IP, and if your opponent has an out for the Raritari on board, you can IP to make another one. Also, as a Link 4, Raritari is the first ulti that's profitable to summon with Ritual Beast's Bond, being worth more than the material that Bond asks of you rather than just a way to summon a fusion quickly. For a much clearer representation of all of this information and more, I recommend checking out YGO, whose Ritual Beast tutorial was the source of basically everything I know about the deck. That'll be linked in the description, but in the description of that video, he's linked several hours of combo tutorials, deck building and format discussions, and an entire spreadsheet himself, so it'd be nothing short of irresponsible for me to claim I've told you everything you need to know about the support without directing you toward his content. Argenix Touring can summon itself from hand during your opponent's turn, and synchro into a Genix if you control a Genix, and can be treated as level 1 or 3 for the synchro summon of a Genix Synchro. Argenix Undyne can banish a Genix from graveyard to gain that monster's attribute and become a tuner if that monster was a tuner, and if you control a Genix Synchro outside in the grave, can add self and a second Genix back to hand, but macros you for the rest of the turn. Arms of Genix Return 0 is a level 10 synchro that requires a Dark Tuner, can negate a monster effect and destroy it by banishing a monster from grave with the same attribute, but only once each turn per attribute, and can shuffle back Genixes of different attributes from grave or banish, then pop up to that many spell traps. And Repair Genix Controller is a link one for any level 4 or lower Genix that adds a Genix back to hand on summon, and each time a Genix is added to hand, you can immediately normal summon a Genix, but you're locked from the extra except synchros, and you have to use a Genix tuner for them. Yeah man, 5 normal summons sounds crazy. I'm sure you satisfy your wife with that. Check this shit out. This card recontextualizes the identity of Genix from... Does anyone know what Genix's identity was? Into a sort of Fluandery style chain of normal summon, search, and repeat. Starting from Turbo, Magma, Crusher, or Power Planner, Genix's proprietary loop of gadget-like normal summons, you can get a search, make repair, add back the material you used, then immediately normal it again to search, summon, search, summon, search, summon until your zones are clogged up. And when that happens, you can restart your normal chain once you have more room with Genix Ally Birdman, a level 3 Genix searchable with Power Planner. As a Genix tuner, he serves the vital purpose of facilitating your extra deck plays, as well as helping you manage which levels you have on field and which ones you have in hand to normal once again for another search. Another face you might be familiar with that's searchable with Power Planner and has a unique way to trigger repair is Undyne, who can mill new Undyne to set up its effect later in the turn, and search Controller, who obviously doesn't do anything as a normal monster, but is a tuner, and searching it will give you a chance to normal some other Genix in hand that maybe does do something because you of course don't specifically have to normal the one you just searched. Our Undyne also triggers repair, but because of the macro effect and needing a Genix Synchro, which I mean, you're probably only playing Return 0. This will likely just be a play you drop right at the end of your combo to get an extra level 7 or 8 synchro on your board. Also may be important involving Old Undyne, you can tune it with Controller or Birdman into Lauren, whose effect can bounce all your Genixes back to hand, clearing your zones and triggering repair, meaning you get to keep all the advantage you've built up, but start fresh on organizing your board in such a way to optimize what tuners hit the board when. You know what else triggers repair? Bonfire. Jamie, roll the clip of every bonfire target reviewed. Although Magma isn't the greatest name to go through since it's the farthest removed from getting to Birdman, it is neat that bonfire can either be a starter or an extender if you use it with repair up. But to that point, this isn't exactly the type of extension the deck is looking for, because the number one issue plaguing the deck is that if repair is negated, you just lose. All the deck's gas is centralized in that one card, so if it gets impermed or veilered, there really is no coming back from that. The only way to really deal with that is to load up on Crossout, Cerevis. Hell, brother, if I were you, I'd be sleeving up Forbidden Lance. You could, I guess, play a Horus engine and make Hieratic Sky Dragon before getting locked to Synchros. Eagle Booster would be perfect, but if your opponent is smart enough to consider you might be on it, they can just hold their hand trap until after the first normal summon resolves and your main monster zones aren't clear anymore. If you do manage to keep repair safe for a whole turn and manage your summon chains perfectly, there's plenty of generic and generic adjacent synchros left over that can give you a pretty decent board like Dawn Dragster and Dispater. Touring can be used to turn a synchro you've already used into Return Zero if you don't already have it, or into Locomotion Argenix, whose effect will trigger to steal a monster your opponent controls. And Return Zero is of course a fantastic end board piece, being at bare minimum Crystal Wing against strictly mono attribute decks, but capping out at 6 Crystal Wings depending on what attributes your opponent tries to go through. In the current meta, where non-dark decks are constantly making one specific dark monster, it's not unlikely they'll get at least 2 activations out of him, and the more pile combo festy decks become, the more likely he is to have an even higher ceiling. And you know, his only requirement is a dark tuner. A lot of decks have dark tuners. Most common kind of tuner, as it so happens. I'm not always trying to be the boy who cried this can be used generically, but I do hear we're in the market for a new best level 10 synchro. Maybe, we figure out some sort of engine to make Return Zero early with a Light Engrave? I'm not here to tell you what's a good idea, I'm just asking some questions. Not a game, but questions. Void Breach boosts your Infernoids by 100 for each of their banished bros, and if you control no monsters or only fiends, can either add a banished Noid back to hand or summon one from hand ignoring its summoning conditions. Void Reignition is card destruction as long as you can prove you're playing Infernoid, and can banish itself from graveyard to return up to 11 banished Noids to the grave. Infernoid Evil is a fusion of 2 Noids that banishes a Noid from grave on summon to mill different Infernoids equal to that monster's level, and when sent to the grave or banished, searches a void spell or trap. An Infernoid Flood is a link 4 that requires a Noid, contribute a monster to negate a summon, can banish a card on field when a card is banished from your grave, and when your opponent destroys it, it summons an Infernoid from deck ignoring its summoning conditions. These cards add a lot of potential options for Infernoid, giving them better ways to manage the amount of Noids in grave, and better payoffs, with Flood being both a summon negate, the worst type of negation, and having the ability to convert any Noid special summon into a field banish. As a Firelink 4, he pairs perfectly with the number 1 princess in the world, Hatsune Miku, meaning you get to slot that into your end board easily as well. And Evil is one of the most cracked consistency pieces maybe ever, being able to fill your grave with a critical mass of Infernoids and search your back row, meaning you'll have much better access to Feast, adding a monster negate, a spell negate, and a crow to your board faster than you can say Sightsamus. But we're gonna have to go into some of the downsides. Evil is a pain in the ass to summon. The only in-archetype way to do it is Imagination, and going first, Imagination is just Poly. And reminder, it's only searchable by Evil, so it's so inconsistent and inefficient that some players have taken to running, I can't believe I'm saying this, Dark Fusion just because it's exactly the same, but at least has an upside since it gives the monster targeting protection. The obvious option jumping out at you is probably Instant Fusion, but of course draw the one of, why didn't I think of that? But also, it relies on having a banished target on summon, so not leaving material in grave is not ideal. Best way to get one in grave early is with Decatron, which you can of course find with Sinful Spoils, so there you have it folks. Best way to resolve Evil is just draw the best 2 cards in your deck every time. I am not easily frustrated by card design, but I really am struggling to ascertain the vision behind this card. What precisely you're meant to do to access it with any consistency. At least they were nice enough to give you a non-once per turn card destruction to try to dig for that fusion spell, but let's not pretend that's consistency. The one sort of attractive build of Infernoid is as a variant of Snake Eye, since their ability to loop level 1 fires is a perfect fit for Infernoid's desire to loop the hell out of Decatron. Since they're much more adept at generating link material, you can make Proxy F Magician if you want to get to Evil, and the addition of Flood and Feast to a Snake Eye end board is an attractive option, but to me it just looks like a good deck with 13 bricks added. Not really very appealing when the best way to play a deck is to just make some other deck worse. Am I just being a downer? I feel like I'm usually a pretty good hype man for new cards, but I just don't see what the vision here was. Dragon Master Magia is a fusion of Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, or 3 Blue Eyes monsters, and a Chaos or BLS ritual that can negate a monster, a spell, and a trap once each turn, and when your opponent removes it, can summon a Blue Eyes monster or Chaos or BLS ritual from extra deck or graveyard. graveyard. Great card in theory, 3 negates on his own is nothing to shrug off even if one of the 3 is significantly less useful than the other 2, but while the power of the card is obvious, so too is the difficult material line. Anytime a fusion names a material, you can look at Mud Dragon lines, but Mud Dragon's effect only fuses from field, so now we've got to somehow summon a ritual monster. Best Chaos ritual is Illusion of Chaos, and his interaction with Magician Souls means you're going to want to find some way to fuse him from the graveyard. I think our best bet is Ultimate Fusion, but because of the specific wording on Ultimate Fusion, we have to use specifically Ultimate Dragon, similar to how Red Eyes Fusion has to use specifically Red Eyes. So yeah, just no solid options. That was a fun break though. Back to the 4-page rants. Phantom of Yubel is a fusion of a Yubel monster and a fiend with 0 attack and defense that you can summon by shuffling the materials back from hand, field, or grave back into the deck. It can't be used as fusion material or destroyed by battle, and contribute itself to overwrite an opponent's monster effect into letting you pop a Yubel monster from deck. This card is absolutely batshit insane for Yubel. Being able to put up a monster negate as early as frame 1 if you're willing to shuffle back 2 from hand makes the deck way stronger into hand traps and established boards, on top of just naturally improving your ceiling by letting you swap 2 random guys in the trash for a negate. With Nightmare Throne, you can pop a spirit from deck to summon Yubel and immediately shuffle back both to insulate Lotus from Ash Blossom, and even if you have to tribute it on your own turn, its effect will immediately put its own materials back into rotation, so the next available open game state, you can just summon a second copy so it'll be alive for your opponent's turn. Let's also not overlook the fact that being able to shuffle back spirits, beckoning beasts, and even squirmers extends the hell out of your grind game. The guarantee that you'll always have a search target for spirit gates or a summon for Lotus in deck deep into the late game makes those cards a lot more valuable. And although it can't recur other copies of itself because it can't be used as fusion material, which by the way protects it from making your entire board super poly fodder, since it's a level 9, you can use Nightmare Throne's second effect to return it to the extra deck when you pop Spirit or Yubel, so you can keep making more Phantoms forever and ever. Flipping that around, you can also make an early Phantom, pop it with something like Sharvara, and use Throne to add, then summon Spirit, getting your main engine rolling. Being a fusion you can make for cheap on turn 1 also makes Cross Sheep a solid option for the deck, like if Vicious Astral Out actually did something.
I'm like, what do you say fuck me for?
How much more do I even have to do to sell you on this thing? You summon it with materials from grave. It's free house.
It's like a fake fusion monster. It's not like a real fusion monster. It just happens.
If you need one more Nightmare Pain Reflect to kill, you can just summon it. For free. It's free. Fuck, you can summon 3 of them. For free. If your opponent leaves Nightmare Pain on your field and you've got enough material in the bin, you can just summon 3 Phantoms without activating anything, swing into a 2700 body, and you fucking win. For free. If they try to interact with you doing that, no they didn't. Now your interruption is my extender. The only way this card could be any better is if you could play it generically. Yeah, I think you know where this is going. Because Nightmare Throne sets up the summon of Phantom on its own, we've started seeing a trend of literally any random decks leaving up 3 Throne, 1 Spirit, 1 Yubel for a free monster negate. If you're fine using your normal before getting your negate up, it's even a free link material along the way. For decks like Chimera, you can use the Yubel on field as material for Burr for Phantom Beast King, and in Labyrinth you can use Throne to get Coup Clock instead if you need it. In conclusion, this entire paragraph has been a long-winded means of telling you Ash the Throne. Archfiend's Advent can be summoned without tributing if you troll Shining Sarcophagus, and on summon takes control of an opponent's monster. This card was revealed at the same time as Phantom of Yubel, which makes me feel the same emotion as the time they released the movie Ferdinand on the same day as Star Wars The Last Jedi. For what it's worth, I could see the intended use case of this card as something to summon with Gandora if your opponent has a monster that can't be destroyed by it, but can be targeted so you can take their lone remaining body and hopefully swing for game. I am downright shocked. No, hold on, let me get a thesaurus. Gobsmacked that this is the problem with Shining Sarcophagus that they chose to address first. Red Lotus King Flame Crime is a level 3 fire fiend that quickly summons itself if you control a fiend tuner or your opponent controls a special summon monster, burns for 4 for each fire you control on summon, and when it's synced off you could send 1 normal trap from your deck to the graveyard. The surface level purpose of this card is to more strongly tie Red Dragon Archfiend together with its extremely strong but unsearchable trap cards like Red Rain and Time to Stand Up. Soul Resonator can search Flame Crime instead of Bone Archfiend, and the levels will still line up to make Red Rising, meaning off just Soul you can end on Abyss and Red Rain. With an extender like Crimson or Bone, you can make some pretty sick boards with a new tool in the back row to diversify your interruption. Another idea is to mill Rainbow Bridge of Salvation to get it to a field spell like Necro Valley or Dragon Ravine. Ravine can get you access to Lubellium, meaning you can use the Bestial Engine and even enhance the only open RDA cards, and access to a field spell also makes Ancient Pixie Dragon an actual viable piece of the deck, where before it was just one of the less terrible level 7 Dark Dragon synchros. It does also add some new options to Soul Resonator Labyrinth, a deck that's been experimented with but never really came into its own. Having a search for Soul that can get welcomed to the graveyard to somewhat establish engine access or get something like Rollback or Black Goat in the grave while also giving you the option to make Abyss for an Omni Negate might be an attractive option for Labyrinth, but it's not really conclusive enough to say this is Soul's big break. Okay, we had fun. Time for the boring part. This card's operative function is to win in time. Obviously in Resonator's normal summoning Soul with 1 minute on the clock is now GG, but you could already make that happen with Vagina Dragon, so the real obnoxious bit of it is that if your opponent goes first, you can summon Flame Crime the moment they special summon to steal a game you otherwise wouldn't have even had a turn in. Maybe that just makes it worse. Fire Crime going second, but being an on-summon trigger, you can mill with something like Beatrice, and Reborn with Promethean Princess makes it a little easier to use going first, so to me it kinda hits the sweet spot that very few time cards manage. I don't typically talk about time cards on this show, because I'm not 100% sure how legal it is to acknowledge them, but this one is some premium gourmet shit that you might even want to consider outside of the deck it's designed for that reason alone. Toy Box is a continuous spell that once per turn either sets 2 toy monsters from hand, deck, field, or graveyard to the back row, or pops 2 cards from your back row, and once per turn can Sakuretsu Armor by sending a face-down card you control to the graveyard. Toy Soldier can be set in the back row as a spell, summons itself if it's sent from the back row to the graveyard, and when it's summoned either searches Toy Box, or if you already have it, searches any level 4 light monster. Toy Tank can also be set and summons itself if it goes from the back row to the grave, and contribute itself to summon a level 6 or lower monster from hand or graveyard if you control Toy Box. It's not common new cards come out that I just have absolutely nothing to say about on release, but I still need to talk about it in anticipation of cards coming out in the near future, but even less common do I find that said cards probably won't even matter enough to bring up then either. Currently there isn't really a reliable way to use these cards, Box being your only way to grab the monsters and your only way to trigger them, and those effects being tied to a single once per turn is incredibly flawed. It is a soft once per turn, so if you have 2 copies, I guess you're in business. Doesn't seem like it's gonna get any better anytime soon, because the payoff of searching any level 4 light is kinda balanced around the inherent inconsistency of proccing Soldier. There's 400 targets, so fuck you, use your imagination. Utopia joke. So really the only thing to say about these guys is that they're projected to be the 2nd or 3rd best way to play Whitewoods when those cards come out, but that video is going to be a clusterfuck and quite possibly a 2-parter as is, so who the hell knows if we're gonna have time to circle back to this topic. Bryanak, the magical ice dragon, is level 6 generic synchro that can pitch a card when it's synchro summon to bounce a card on the field, and can pitch a card when it's summoned from the graveyard to also bounce a card on the field. Now this thing looks like an ice barrier, of course, but I didn't talk about him in the ice barrier segment because he's not an ice barrier and doesn't really have anything to do with ice barriers. He didn't even make the cut in an ice barrier deck, so he's pretty much just his own thing. He's more interesting in a deck like Goaty that can make it as an interruption, then link him off for Coral Anemone on turn 3 to use the second effect. Hypothetically, if a deck could summon him, clear him off the field, and then reborn him all in the opponent's turn, he could serve as 2 interruptions, but that's 2 discards and a lot of setup for just 2 bounces. Outside of that, he's just kind of an okay removal option for decks that are good at making 6s. Wing Karibo level 6 is treated as both an elemental hero and a favorite card, can only be summoned by banishing an E-Hero fusion or a Wing Karibo from hand, field, or graveyard, and when your opponent attacks or uses a monster effect on the field, you contribute it to pop that monster and burn equal to its attack. What a silly card. Highly doubt it makes the cut in the ever-evolving hero deck, but it's a lot more feasible than I would have expected from a card like this. Since it's treated as a hero, just about all of your searchers, like Stratos, Shadow Mist, and Crusader, can access it, and since it's a favorite, Infernal Rage can grab it, giving you a second decent search target for him if you already have Contact in hand. And then, if you draw it, it's not like a terrible extender. It'd be better if you banish any hero instead of specifically an E-Hero fusion, but you take what you can get. So the consistency of being able to use him isn't really at issue. The more pressing matter is that he's kind of just Ghost Ogre. Pretty mid payoff when hero already has plenty of destruction-based interrupts. It is cool that his Pee-wee stats aren't so much of an issue since he also triggers when he's attacked, so you can get that value off of him. But all told, he's probably not justifying his spot on the list. Let's talk briefly about what's not in the set. First of all, on a very strange decision, they've released some of the Striker support, but not all of it. Cyanos and Temperance are alright, but divorced from the full context of all in which they live and what came before them, it's kind of hard to discuss them for more than 10 seconds. Cyanos is another way to an ace, and Temperance is a decent board breaker and IP summon, but with Spectra, Camellia, and Engage Zero still up in the coconut tree, I can't really talk much about the more link combo leaning build of Striker. More importantly though, Moon of the Closed Sky is in here. This was their last chance to print it before the Infinite Forbidden, when every deck that can make 3 bodies would need it for Fiendsmith, but they didn't take it. To the simple-minded, this is a good thing because at first you might think it's great that Fiendsmith won't have access to such a generic enabler that lets them be splashed in literally everything, but that simply isn't the case here. There remains one place Closed Sky could be printed in, the Infinite Forbidden. If that's the case, then we'll be exactly where we were before, but instead of knowing a month in advance of info format, we'll know a week in advance of info format. This is a conundrum on multiple levels. For anyone attending the NAWCQ like myself, there's 2 completely different paths the format being played at the event could take, and we'll find out on July 12th, with 7 days left to test. Are we just supposed to test both and master neither? I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to make a video about these cards next month when it's impossible to say what they'll do on release. I don't know what's going to happen. But I'm going to get this done if it kills me. Because I'm the